The stars stretched endlessly across the viewport as the human ship moved through the darkness of space. Inside the vessel named Harmony's Dream, Ambassador Hyan Wu stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the massive station growing larger ahead of them. It was the Velkari Sovereignty, a city floating among the stars, home to millions of aliens who had never set foot on Earth and never would. Beside him, Dr. Yuna checked her data pad for the 100th time. She was nervous, though she tried not to show it. This was humanity's first real chance to make friends with a powerful alien empire. The Velkari controlled dozens of star systems and had technology that made human science look like children playing with sticks. Captain Day 1 entered the bridge, his military uniform perfectly pressed. He had been a soldier once, fighting in the colony wars, but now he served as the ship's commander and protector of the diplomatic mission. His eyes were sharp and watchful. He trusted aliens about as far as he could throw them in zero gravity. The docking procedure took an hour. When the airlock finally opened, they were greeted by 3 Velkari officials. The aliens were tall and slender, with skin that seemed to glow with soft blue light. They had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on their faces, and their movements were graceful like dancers. They wore robes that shifted colors as they moved. The lead official, whose name sounded like wind chimes when spoken, guided them through corridors that seemed grown rather than built. Everything was curved and organic, pulsing with bioluminescent light. Other Velkari stopped to stare at the humans, their 4 eyes blinking in sequence. Some chittered to each other in their musical language. They were brought to a massive chamber. That took Hyan Wu's breath away. The ceiling stretched up hundreds of feet, covered in what looked like living crystal formations that glowed in rainbow colors. At the far end, suspended in the air on some kind of invisible platform, sat Queen Consort Theramel. She was larger than the other Velkari, and her skin glowed brighter, shifting between blue and purple. Her robes were decorated with patterns that seemed to move on their own. 3 other Velkari sat near her, smaller and less decorated. These were her consort mates. Yuna had read in the briefing materials. The Velkari had complex family structures that humans were still trying to understand. Hyan Wu stepped forward and bowed in the way their cultural advisors had taught him. He spoke clearly in English, knowing that the translation devices would handle the rest. He welcomed the Queen Consort, praised her wisdom, and expressed humanity's hope for friendship and cooperation between their peoples. Theramel listened with all 4 eyes fixed on him. When he finished, she spoke. Her voice was beautiful, like music, but there was something cold in it, something that made Day 1's hand unconsciously move closer to his sidearm. She thanked them for coming such a long way. She said that the Velkari were always interested in studying new species. The way she said studying made it sound like they were insects under a microscope. She asked them to tell her about Earth, about humanity, about what made them think they were ready to join the greater galactic community. Hyan Wu had prepared for this. He spoke about human achievements, about art and music and literature. He talked about human diversity, how people from different cultures had learned to work together. He mentioned human science and exploration, how humans had spread across their solar system before discovering faster-than-light travel from a crashed probe. Theramel seemed amused by all of it. She asked questions that seemed innocent but felt like tests. How many humans were there? How long did they live? How did their governments work? What resources did Earth have to offer? Dr. Yuna spoke up then, explaining that she was a biologist and would love to learn about Velkari life sciences. She had read what little information was available about their species and was fascinated by their reproduction methods. This made Theramel's eyes brighten with what might have been interest. She gestured, and one of her consort mates brought forward a floating display. Images appeared in the air, showing complex genetic diagrams. and what looked like artificial wombs filled with developing. Valkyrie Young, the queen consort, explained with obvious pride how her species had evolved beyond natural reproduction. They designed their offspring in laboratories, selecting every trait, ensuring every child was perfect for their intended role in society. She could produce 20 eggs in a single breeding season, each one carefully crafted to be superior to the last generation. Yuna listened with scientific interest, asking questions about the process. But when Thyramel asked about human reproduction, the atmosphere in the room changed. Yuna explained honestly. Humans reproduced naturally, through genetic combination that was random. A human pregnancy lasted 9 months and usually produced 1 child, sometimes 2. Human babies were born helpless and required years of care to reach maturity. The sound that came from Thyramel was definitely laughter, though it sounded like breaking glass. Other Valkyrie in the chamber joined in, their chitters echoing off the crystal ceiling. The queen consort's 4 eyes sparkled with amusement that bordered on contempt. She said that human reproduction sounded primitive, inefficient, and dangerous. How could a species trust their future to random genetic lottery? How could they accept such waste, producing only 1 or 2 offspring when the Valkyrie produced 20 perfect ones? How could they function knowing that each child might be weak or flawed or unsuited for survival? Haiyan Wu felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his diplomatic smile. Yuna's face had gone red, but she answered calmly. She explained that human genetic diversity was actually a strength, that the random combinations produced unexpected talents and abilities, that human children, while requiring more care, formed deep emotional bonds with their parents that drove human civilization forward. Thyramel waved a dismissive hand. She said that emotions were inefficient, that bonds could be designed and optimized just like everything else. She looked directly at the 3 humans and spoke words that Day One would remember for the rest of his life. Human fertility was a cosmic joke, she said, barely better than bacteria. The Valkyrie had evolved beyond such primitive methods 3,000 years ago, and it showed in their superiority. Humans might have stumbled into space travel, but they would never be truly advanced until they abandoned their animal breeding practices. The insult hung in the air like poison. Day One's hand was definitely on his weapon now, though he hadn't drawn it. Yuna looked like she wanted to throw her datapad at the queen's glowing face. But Haiyan Wu, who had been a diplomat for 30 years and had dealt with insults from enemies and allies alike, simply smiled wider. He asked if the queen consort would be interested in a demonstration, a cultural exchange where both species could share their biological knowledge more directly. He made it sound like an honor, a privilege, a chance for the superior Valkyrie to educate the primitive humans. Thyramel considered this. Her 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of thought among her people. Finally, she agreed. She was curious to examine the human genome up close, she said. It would make an interesting addition to her research archives. A study in evolutionary dead ends. As the 3 humans were escorted to their guest quarters, Day One leaned close to Haiyan Wu and whispered in Korean, knowing the translators wouldn't catch it. He asked if the ambassador had a plan, or if they were just going to let this alien insult their entire species. Haiyan Wu smiled and replied in the same language. He said that pride comes before a fall, and the Valkyrie queen had an enormous amount of pride. Sometimes, he said, the best revenge was simply giving someone exactly what they asked for. Yuna understood what he meant. The Valkyrie thought they knew everything about biology, about life, about reproduction. But they had never encountered human DNA. They had never seen what humanity's chaotic, inefficient, primitive genetic code could do when given the chance. The demonstration was scheduled for 3 days from now. In the meantime, the humans had work to do. The guest quarters were nicer than Day One had expected. The walls were made of the same bioluminescent material as the rest of the station, glowing softly in colors that shifted from blue to green. The furniture seemed to grow directly from the floor, adjusting its shape when someone sat down. There were 3 separate sleeping chambers and a common area where the team could meet and plan. Dr. Yuna spent the next 2 days preparing for the demonstration. She worked with samples she had brought from Earth, human genetic material sealed in specially designed containers. She studied every piece of information she could find about Velkari biology, which was not much. The aliens were secretive about their genetic technology, treating it as both sacred and classified. What she did learn was fascinating. The Velkari had eliminated most genetic diseases thousands of years ago. They no longer aged the way humans did. They had engineered themselves to be resistant to radiation, toxins, and most known pathogens. Every Velkari was designed before birth to be strong, intelligent, and beautiful by their standards. But there was something else Yuna noticed in her research. The Velkari had very low genetic diversity. All of them were similar at the DNA level, like cousins or even closer. They had optimized themselves so much that they had lost the variation that made evolution possible. They were perfect, but they were also fragile in a way they did not seem to understand. Haiyan Wu spent his time in diplomatic meetings with lower-level Velkari officials. He learned about their empire, their history, their politics. The Velkari had expanded peacefully for the most part, absorbing other species through cultural and economic pressure rather than military conquest. They saw themselves as benevolent guides, helping lesser species evolve and improve. What bothered Haiyan Wu was the subtle arrogance in everything they said. They truly believed they were superior to every other species in the galaxy. They had never encountered a problem they could not solve with their technology and genetic engineering. The idea that humans might have something valuable to teach them was literally unthinkable to most Velkari. Day 1, meanwhile, explored the station. He told the others he was just curious, but really he was doing what soldiers do. He was learning the layout, identifying security measures, finding escape routes. He did not trust the Velkari. Something about Thyramal's laughter had set off alarm bells in his head. He wanted to be ready if things went wrong. On the evening before the demonstration, the 3 humans met in their common area. Yuna explained what would happen during the ceremony called the resonance. It was an ancient Velkari ritual used when they wanted to study another species without invasive procedures. A biofield would be created that could read genetic information from both participants. It was supposed to be completely safe, like looking at a book without touching it. The human genetic sample would be placed in one circle. Thyramal herself would stand in another circle. The biofield would activate and create a bridge between them, allowing the Velkari scientists to analyze human DNA in detail. The whole process would take about an hour. Then it would be over, and the humans could return to their ship and leave this arrogant species behind. Day 1 asked what could go wrong. Yuna admitted she was not entirely sure. The technology was beyond current human understanding. But according to Velkari records, the resonance had been performed thousands of times with hundreds of species. There had never been a serious incident. It was considered perfectly safe. Haiyan Wu looked at both of them and said something that surprised them. He said that sometimes the universe had a sense of humor. Sometimes the proud needed to be humbled. Sometimes the impossible happened just when everyone was sure they knew all the rules. He said he had a feeling that tomorrow would be a very interesting day. That night, Yuna could not sleep. She kept thinking about what Thyramal had said, calling human reproduction a cosmic joke, saying humans were barely better than bacteria. The insult burned in her mind. She had dedicated her life to studying biology, to understanding the miracle of life in all its forms. And this alien queen for all her technology and genetic engineering, did not understand the most basic truth. Life was not about perfection. Life was about adaptation, survival, change. The messy, random, chaotic nature of human reproduction was not a weakness. It was humanity's greatest strength. Every human child was unique, carrying combinations of genes that had never existed before and would never exist again. That diversity had allowed humans to survive ice ages and plagues and wars. It had made humanity resilient in ways the Valkyrie, for all their perfection, could never be. The morning of the demonstration arrived. The three humans were escorted to a place called the Genesis Chamber. It was the largest room they had seen on the station, a massive dome that seemed to be made of living crystal. The walls pulsed with light in patterns that reminded Yuna of heartbeats. In the center of the room were two circles drawn on the floor in glowing lines. Valkyrie. Scientists filled the observation areas above, looking down with their 4 eyes glittering with curiosity. This was entertainment for them, A1 realized. They had come to watch the primitive humans be studied like lab animals. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Thyramel entered from a different door, flanked by her consort mates and personal physicians. She wore different robes today, ones that seemed to be made of light itself. She looked regal and confident, and utterly sure of her superiority. She greeted the humans with a nod that was barely polite, not one of the Valkyrie. Scientists explained the procedure again. Dr. Yuna would place the human genetic sample in one circle. Queen Consort Thyramel would stand in the other. The biofield would activate and create a harmonic resonance between the two samples. The Valkyrie would be able to read and analyze the human genetic code in complete detail. The process would not harm either participant or the sample. Yuna carefully placed the container with human DNA in the designated circle. The container opened automatically, exposing the genetic material to the air. It looked like nothing special, just a small amount of clear fluid in a crystalline holder. Thyramel stepped into her circle with the grace of a dancer. She looked at the human sample with obvious amusement. She made a comment in her own language that made the other Valkyrie laugh. One of the translators whispered to Hyun Woo what she had said. She had called it the failed experiment of nature. The lead scientist activated the biofield. At first, nothing visible happened. Then the air between the two circles began to shimmer like heat rising from hot pavement. Colors swirled in the space, blues and greens and purples mixing together. The light grew brighter, forming patterns that looked almost like DNA helixes spinning in the air. Thyramel stood calmly, observing the display with scientific interest. The Valkyrie scientists above were recording everything, their instruments humming and clicking. Yuna watched nervously, though she was not sure what she was nervous about. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. Then something changed. The colors in the biofield shifted suddenly from cool blues and greens to warm golds and oranges. The patterns became more complex, more chaotic. Thyramel's expression changed from calm observation to confusion. She took a step back, but the biofield moved with her, maintaining the connection. The Valkyrie scientists started making concerned noises. Their instruments were showing readings they had never seen before. The human genetic code was not just being observed. It was responding. It was reaching out through the biofield like something alive and aware. Yuna had studied human DNA her entire career. She knew it was incredibly complex, full of ancient viral codes and genetic switches left over from millions of years of evolution. Human DNA was messy and chaotic compared to the carefully designed Valkyrie genome. But that chaos made it adaptable in ways that engineered DNA was not. The biofield flared brighter. Thyramel gasped, and her 4 eyes went wide. She tried to step out of the circle, but her feet would not move. The connection had become stronger, deeper. The human DNA was not just sharing information. It was integrating, bonding, adapting to the Velkari biology it had encountered. The lead scientist shouted orders. Other Velkari rushed to the controls, trying to shut down the biofield. But the field had taken on a life of its own, powered by the interaction between two completely different types of genetic code. The human DNA, shaped by chaos and survival, had found something in the Velkari DNA that it recognized. Something ancient and fundamental that the Velkari had engineered away but was still buried deep in their code. The ability to truly reproduce. To create new life through combination and chance, rather than design and control. Theramon cried out, not in pain but in shock. She could feel something happening inside her body, something that should have been impossible. The biofield was not just reading her genetic code. It was rewriting it. The human DNA was teaching her cells how to do something they had forgotten how to do naturally. The field collapsed suddenly, like a bubble popping. The lights in the Genesis chamber flickered and went dim. Thyrama fell to her knees, supported by her consort mates who had rushed to her side. The Velkari scientists were in chaos, shouting and arguing and checking their instruments. Dr. Yuna stood frozen, her mind racing through what she had just witnessed. It should have been impossible. The resonance was supposed to be observation only. But human DNA did not follow the rules that other species followed. It was aggressive, adaptive, opportunistic. Given any chance to reproduce, to spread, to survive, it took that chance. Haiyan Wu looked at Day One, and both men understood without words that everything had just changed. The demonstration had not gone the way anyone expected. Theramon was helped to her feet. Her skin had changed color slightly, taking on warmer tones. She looked at the humans with an expression that was completely different from her earlier arrogance. It was fear mixed with wonder, shock mixed with understanding. She spoke one sentence before her physicians rushed her away. The translation came through crystal clear. "What have you done to me?" The humans were escorted back to their quarters immediately after the incident. This time, the escort was not polite officials, but armed guards. The Velkari soldiers did not point their weapons at the humans, but their hands stayed near them. The message was clear. The humans were no longer guests. They were prisoners. Day One paced the common area like a caged animal. He had known something would go wrong. He had felt it in his bones. Now they were trapped on an alien station, surrounded by a species that had every reason to be angry with them. He checked the door every few minutes, though he knew it was locked from the outside. Yuna sat at the table with her head in her hands. She kept replaying the scene in her mind, trying to understand what had happened. The resonance should have been safe. Every record said it was safe. But somehow, the human DNA had done something unprecedented. It had crossed the barrier between observation and action. It had integrated with Velkari biology. Haiyan Wu was the calmest of the three. He sat in one of the adaptive chairs, his fingers steepled under his chin, thinking. He had been in difficult diplomatic situations before, though nothing quite like this. The key was to understand what had really happened and what it meant for both species. Hours passed with no word from the Velkari. The humans ate from the food supplies they had brought with them, not trusting anything the aliens might provide now. They talked in low voices, sharing theories about what might have occurred during the resonance. Yuna explained her best guess. Human DNA was incredibly resilient and adaptable because of its evolutionary history. Humans carried genetic code from viruses that had infected their ancestors millions of years ago. That viral DNA had taught human genetics how to integrate, how to spread, how to invade other biological systems. The Velkari had eliminated such junk DNA from their own genome, making it pure and perfect, but also passive. When the biofield connected the two genetic codes, The human DNA had done what it was programmed to do by millions of years of evolution. It had found a way to reproduce. It had identified compatible elements in Thyramal's biology and bonded with them. The Velkari Queen's body, designed to be the perfect genetic vessel, had accepted the human code as if it were supposed to be there. Day one asked the question they were all thinking. Was Thyramal carrying a human child? Could that even be possible? Una said she did not know. The biology was too different. But if the human DNA had truly integrated at a fundamental level, if it had activated dormant reproductive pathways in Velkari genetics, then yes, it might be possible. It would be the most unprecedented event in biological history, but it might be possible. On the third day of their confinement, the door opened. A Velkari official entered, one they had not seen before. This one wore robes marked with symbols that Hinwu recognized as medical insignia. The official's 4 eyes looked tired, and its skin color was duller than normal, a sign of stress among the Velkari. The official spoke formally. Queen Consort Thyramal requested the presence of Captain Day 1. Only Captain Day 1. The request was not negotiable. Day 1 exchanged glances with the others. Hai and Wu gave a small nod. They had no choice but to comply. Day 1 straightened his uniform and followed the official out of the quarters. The door locked behind him, leaving Una and Haiyan Wu to wait and worry. The walk through the station felt longer than before. Day 1 noticed that the normally busy corridors were almost empty. The few Velkari he saw moved quickly, avoiding eye contact. Something had changed in the station's atmosphere. There was tension in the air, fear even. He was brought to a section of the station he had not seen before. The walls here were different, covered in living vines with flowers that glowed softly. The air smelled sweet, almost like a garden. These were the private quarters of the royal family, he realized. The most secure and sacred part of the sovereignty dot. The official left him at a door that opened automatically. Day 1 stepped through into a room that was surprisingly simple compared to the grand throne chamber. There were plants growing everywhere, creating a small forest inside the station. Water trickled somewhere out of sight. In the center of the room, sitting on a simple bench, was Thyramal. She looked different. Her skin still glowed, but the colors were wrong for a Velkari, warmer and more varied. Her movements as she gestured for him to sit were less fluid, more careful. Her 4 eyes focused on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Day 1 sat on the bench she had indicated, maintaining a respectful distance. He waited for her to begin, as protocol demanded when addressing royalty. Finally, Thyramal spoke. Her voice was quieter than before, missing the musical confidence it had held in the throne chamber. She said that her physicians had run every test they knew. They had used technology that could map every cell in her body, that could trace every chemical reaction, that could predict biological outcomes with perfect accuracy. She was pregnant. With a human child, Day 1 felt his mind go blank. He had expected this possibility, but hearing it confirmed was different. He started to ask how that was possible, but she held up one hand to stop him. She explained what her physicians had discovered. The human DNA from the resonance had not just entered her system. It had rewritten portions of her genetic code, activating biological pathways that the Velkari had eliminated thousands of years ago. Her body had remembered how to reproduce naturally, without laboratory intervention, without genetic design. And once activated, those pathways had done what nature designed them to do, that the human genetic material had formed an embryo. Her Velkari body had accepted it, adapted to nurture it, begun the process of gestation. The embryo was developing according to human patterns, not Velkari ones. 9 months instead of the Velkari 3-month egg cycle. A single child instead of 20. Random genetic combination instead of design perfection. She looked at Day One with an expression he was beginning to recognize despite their biological differences. It was fear. Real, deep fear of the unknown. She said that some of her advisors wanted to terminate the pregnancy immediately. They called it a contamination, a biological attack, a threat to Velkari genetic purity. They wanted the humans executed and all records of the incident destroyed. Daewon felt his body tense, ready to fight even though he knew it would be useless. But Theramel continued speaking. She had refused. She was the queen consort, the greatest genetic architect of her age. She had spent her entire life studying biology, genetics, the nature of life itself. And now she was experiencing something that her species had not experienced in millennia. Natural pregnancy. The chaos and uncertainty and wonder of creating life without knowing exactly what that life would be. Her 4 eyes met his too. She asked him a question that surprised him completely. What was it like being human? Growing inside a mother's body without being designed? Being born random and imperfect? Forming bonds with parents who had not chosen every aspect of your existence? Day One had never thought about these things before. They were just normal parts of human life. But now, trying to explain them to an alien who had grown in a laboratory, he realized how extraordinary they were. He told her about his own mother, a woman who had raised him alone after his father died. She had not chosen him from a genetic menu. She had not designed him to be strong or smart or brave. But she had loved him fiercely, had worked 3 jobs to feed him, had taught him right from wrong through example and patience. That bond, formed through years of care and sacrifice, was stronger than any genetic programming could create. He told her about human children, how they were all different, how parents never knew exactly what they would get. Some children were brilliant, others were kind, others were creative, others were determined. The randomness was not a weakness. It was what made humanity adaptable. When challenges came, there was always someone with the right combination of traits to face them. He told her about human families, messy and imperfect, full of arguments and reconciliations, love and frustration. Not designed, not optimized, but real in a way that the Velkaris carefully controlled. Relationships could never be. Theramel listened to all of this without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she placed one of her hands on her abdomen, where no visible change had occurred yet, but where, inside, a human embryo was growing. She said that she had mocked human fertility. She had called it primitive and inefficient. She had laughed at the idea of leaving reproduction to chance. But now, feeling this life growing inside her, life that she had not designed and could not control, she understood something her species had lost. The Velkari were perfect, but they were also stagnant. Every generation was an improvement on the last, but only in predictable ways. There were no surprises, no unexpected talents, no random combinations that created something entirely new. They had optimized themselves to the point where true evolution had stopped. Humans, with their chaotic reproduction and random genetics, were still evolving, still adapting, still creating new combinations that nature would test against the universe. It was messy and inefficient, yes, but it was also alive in a way that Velkari genetics were not. She looked at Day One and said something that would change everything. She wanted to keep the child. She wanted to let this pregnancy continue and see what happened. She wanted to learn what her species had forgotten, but she needed help. She needed Dr. Yuna to teach her about human pregnancy, about what to expect, about how to care for a naturally conceived child. She needed Ambassador Hyan Wu to help navigate the political storm this would create. And she needed Captain Day One to understand that, in a strange way, this child was his legacy. Not because he was the father in any traditional sense, but because human DNA had made this miracle possible. Day One did not know what to say. This was so far beyond his experience as a soldier or a ship captain. But he looked at this alien queen, sitting in her garden, one hand on her belly, 4 eyes full of hope and fear, and he understood. Life had a way of surprising everyone. Human or Velkari, or anything else in the universe. And sometimes, the greatest strength was not in controlling life, but in accepting its chaos. He told her that he would help, that his whole team would help, that whatever came next, they would face it together. Thyrmal's skin brightened slightly, a sign of relief. She thanked him in her musical language, and for the first time since they had met, it sounded genuine. The impossible had happened. Now they had to figure out what to do about it. News of the Queen, consort's condition, spread through the Velkari sovereignty, like fire through dry grass. Despite attempts to keep it secret, such things could never stay hidden for long. Within a week, every Velkari on the station knew. Within 2 weeks, the entire empire knew. The Queen Consort was carrying an alien child. A human child. Conceived through accident or attack or miracle, depending on who was telling the story. The reaction was exactly what Haiyan-Wu had feared. The Velkari Empire split into factions almost overnight. Some called for the humans to be executed immediately as biological terrorists. Others demanded the pregnancy be terminated and all evidence destroyed. A smaller but vocal group suggested studying the situation carefully before taking action. And an even smaller group, mostly scientists and philosophers, wondered if perhaps this unprecedented event might teach them something valuable. The human delegation remained in their quarters under guard. But the nature of their confinement changed. They were no longer treated as prisoners, but as something stranger. Important hostages, maybe, or witnesses to a miracle. The guards outside their door were there as much to protect them from angry Velkari as to keep them contained. Dr. Yuna was allowed to meet with Thyrmal's physicians twice a day. The meetings were tense at first. The Velkari doctors were among the most brilliant genetic scientists in the galaxy, but they had never dealt with a natural pregnancy. Their knowledge was all theory and laboratory work. They could design a perfect child from scratch, but they did not know how to care for a mother carrying an undesigned one. Yuna taught them everything she knew. She explained the stages of human pregnancy, how the embryo developed week by week. She described the physical changes a mother would experience, the hormones that would flood the body, the nutritional needs that would increase. She talked about morning sickness and mood swings and food cravings and all the messy, unpredictable aspects of natural gestation. The Velkari physicians took notes with an intensity that surprised her. They asked hundreds of questions. Some of their concerns were valid. How could they ensure the hybrid child would be healthy when they could not design away potential problems? What if there were complications during development? How would they handle a birth when Velkari anatomy was different from human anatomy? Other questions revealed how little they understood about natural reproduction. One physician asked seriously if they could just modify the embryo now to fix any imperfections. Yuna had to explain that the whole point was that you could not and should not, that the randomness was not a bug, but a feature, that the imperfections and variations were what made natural life resilient. She showed them scans and videos from Earth, recordings of human pregnancies and births. The Velkari watched these with fascination and something like horror. The process looked so chaotic to them, so uncontrolled. But they could not deny that it worked. Humans had been reproducing this way for millions of years. Ambassador Haiyan-Wu, meanwhile, worked on the political crisis. He sent messages to Earth, updating the human government on the situation. The response was mixed. Some officials saw it as a disaster that could start a war. Others saw it as an opportunity to establish deeper ties with the Velkari Empire. Everyone agreed that they needed to be very careful about what happened next. Hyan Wu also met with Valkyrie officials, trying to calm the situation. He emphasized that the resonance incident had been an accident, not an attack. That humans had no way of knowing their DNA would react that way. That both species were learning something new about biology and life. Some Valkyrie listened. Others refused to see it as anything but an invasion, a contamination of their genetic purity. There were protests outside the royal quarters. Some Valkyrie demanded that Theramal step down from her position. Others called for the entire human species to be banned from Valkyrie space. Through all of this, Theramal remained in her quarters, watched constantly by physicians and surrounded by controversy. But she refused to terminate the pregnancy. She refused to step down. And slowly, day by day, she began to change. Captain Day 1 visited her every few days. At first, he did not know why she wanted to see him. But he came to understand that she needed someone to talk to who was not a physician or an advisor or a politician. Someone who could simply be present with her during this strange and frightening experience. He told her stories about his own childhood, about growing up in a small city on Earth. She asked endless questions about human families, human emotions, human bonds. She was particularly fascinated by the concept of maternal love, the fierce protective feeling that human mothers developed for their children. The Valkyrie had nothing like it. Their children were raised in communal centers, educated by specialists, loved in an abstract way, but not with the intense personal connection humans experienced. As the weeks passed, Theramal began to feel the physical changes of pregnancy. Her body, designed for perfection, was adapting in ways her physicians could barely track. She experienced fatigue, something Valkyrie rarely felt. She had strange cravings for foods she had never liked before. Her emotions became unpredictable, swinging between joy and fear and wonder. Her consort mates did not know how to help her. They had been chosen for genetic compatibility and political alliance, not for emotional support. They cared for her in their way, but they could not understand what she was experiencing. No Valkyrie could. Dr. Yuna became something like a friend during this time. She sat with Theramal during the difficult moments, explained what each symptom meant, reassured her that everything was normal for a human pregnancy. She brought recordings of human music that were supposed to be calming for pregnant women. She taught Theramal breathing exercises and stretching movements that helped with the physical discomfort. One afternoon, about 3 months into the pregnancy, Theramal asked Yuna a question that showed how much she had changed. She asked if Yuna thought the child would love her, not respect her as queen consort, not admire her as a genetic architect, but actually love her as a mother. Yuna was quiet for a moment, understanding the weight of the question. Then she said yes. If Theramal cared for the child, held the child, nurtured the child, then yes, the child would love her. That was how human children were built. They bonded with whoever cared for them, whoever showed them love. Not through genetic programming, but through experience and connection. Theramal's eyes filled with tears. An emotional response she had learned from studying human physiology and had now adopted herself. She said she wanted that. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not what she was designed to be. She wanted to experience the messy, chaotic, beautiful bond between mother and child that the Valkyrie had engineered away thousands of years ago. As the pregnancy continued, something interesting happened in Valkyrie society. The initial anger and fear began to shift. Scientists who had studied the scans of the developing embryo started publishing papers about what they were learning. The hybrid child was developing normally according to human patterns, which meant human genetics were far more adaptable than anyone had believed. The human DNA was not destroying Valkyrie biology, but working with it, creating something new. philosophers began writing about what this meant for the concept of genetic perfection. If perfection meant stagnation, was it really perfect? If the Valkyrie had reached the pinnacle of genetic engineering, where would they go from here? Could they learn something from humanity's chaotic approach? Artists created works inspired by the pregnancy, exploring themes of chance and chaos and new life. Musicians composed pieces that mixed the precise, mathematical tones of Valkyrie music with the emotional melodies of human songs. Not everyone was convinced. There were still protests, still calls for action against the humans. But the conversation had shifted from pure anger to genuine debate. What did this pregnancy mean for the future of both species? Haiyan Wu watched these developments with cautious hope. He sent regular reports to Earth, suggesting that this crisis might actually become an opportunity. If the child was born healthy, if Thyramul survived the birth, if the bond between mother and child was as strong as human bonds typically were, then perhaps the Valkyrie would see that human biology was not primitive, but powerful in different ways. In her quarters, surrounded by medical equipment and growing plants, and her confused but supportive consort mates, Thyramul felt the child move for the first time. It was a flutter, barely noticeable, like a butterfly inside her. Her physicians rushed to scan her, to make sure everything was normal, but she waved them away. She sat in her garden, one hand on her belly, feeling that tiny movement again. A human child, growing inside a Valkyrie queen, an impossible combination of two species who had thought they understood everything about biology and life. She had laughed at human fertility. She had called it a cosmic joke. But now, feeling this life inside her, she understood the truth. The real joke was on the Valkyrie. They had spent thousands of years perfecting their genetics, optimizing every trait, eliminating every flaw. And in doing so, they had lost something essential, the ability to be surprised by life, the joy of not knowing exactly what would happen, the strength that came from accepting chaos instead of always demanding control. The child moved again, stronger this time. Thyramul smiled, an expression she had learned from humans and had made her own. She whispered to the growing life inside her, words in both Valkyrie and the human language she had been learning. She told her daughter that she would love her, not because she was designed to be perfect, but because she existed, because she was real and alive and unique, because she was the bridge between two species, the proof that life always found a way. She told her daughter that she would teach her about both her heritages, the precision and knowledge of the Valkyrie, the resilience and adaptability of humanity. She would be something new, something unprecedented, something wonderful. And Thyramul, who had once thought she understood everything about genetics and life, realized that she was learning what it really meant to be a mother. Not a genetic architect designing a perfect child, but a parent accepting and loving whatever child she was given. The impossible pregnancy continued. And with each day, the galaxy watched and wondered what would happen next. The birth happened on a day when 3 moons were visible through the station's viewing ports, which the Valkyrie considered a sign of good fortune. Thyramul had been in labor for 16 hours, a process that terrified her physicians, who were used to the quick and controlled Valkyrie egg-laying process. Dr. Yuna stayed with her the entire time, coaching her through breathing exercises and explaining what was happening at each stage. The pain was something Thyramul had never experienced before. The Valkyrie had engineered pain away from their reproduction cycle. But this was human childbirth, messy and difficult and real. Yuna held her hand, or the closest Valkyrie equivalent, and told her she was doing wonderfully, that every human mother went through this, that the pain meant everything was working as it should. When the child finally emerged, crying with healthy lungs, the room went completely silent. The Velkari physicians stared in wonder. They had delivered thousands of young from artificial wombs, but they had never seen a live birth before, never heard those first cries, never witnessed the immediate bond between mother and newborn. The baby was cleaned and placed on Thyramul's chest. She was tiny by Velkari standards, with soft pink skin instead of glowing blue. She had only 2 eyes, brown like earth, and a shock of dark hair. Her features were distinctly human, though there was something in the bone structure of her face that hinted at her Velkari heritage. Thyramul looked down at her daughter and cried, tears running down her face in a very human expression of overwhelming emotion. This small, fragile, imperfect creature was hers. Not designed, not optimized, not chosen from a genetic menu, but hers in a way that went deeper than any Velkari parent had experienced in thousands of years. She chose a name that worked in both languages. In human terms, she would be called Hannah, meaning flower. In Velkari, she would be Thyrisha, daughter of Thyra, the child who should not exist but did, the bridge between 2 species, the proof that life always found a way. The news spread across the sovereignty within hours. The human child had been born alive and healthy. Queen Consort Thyramul had survived the birth. Mother and daughter were both doing well. The impossible had become real. The reaction was complicated. Some Velkari were angry, seeing the successful birth as a validation of the contamination they feared. But many more were curious, even excited. The scans and data from the pregnancy had already changed how Velkari scientists thought about genetics. The birth of a healthy hybrid child opened up possibilities. They had never considered Ambassador Hyan Wu was allowed to visit Thyramul a few days after the birth. He found her in her garden quarters, looking exhausted but radiant in a way he had never seen before. She held little Hannah in her arms, rocking her gently and singing a Velkari lullaby in a soft voice. He congratulated her, and she thanked him with genuine warmth. She said that she understood now what humans meant when they talked about love. It was not something that could be designed or optimized. It grew naturally from care and connection. She looked at Hannah with her 4 eyes and knew that she would do anything to protect this small life. She told Hyan Wu that she wanted to make an announcement to the Empire. She wanted to present Hannah to her people and explain what she had learned from this experience. She wanted to propose a new relationship between the Velkari and humanity, based on mutual respect rather than assumed superiority. Hyan Wu advised caution. There were still many Velkari who opposed what had happened. But Thyramul was determined. She was Queen Consort, and she had never backed down from a challenge. She would not start now. The presentation was scheduled for 2 weeks after the birth, giving Thyramul time to recover and prepare. The announcement would be broadcast across the entire Velkari Empire, reaching billions of citizens on dozens of worlds. It would be one of the most important moments in their civilization's recent history. Captain Day 1 spent those 2 weeks in a state of nervous tension. He had grown attached to Thyramul during her pregnancy, seeing her transformation from arrogant queen to concerned mother. He had also grown surprisingly fond of little Hannah, who looked so small and vulnerable surrounded by aliens. He wanted them both to be safe, but he knew that this announcement could go very wrong. Dr. Yuna used the time to compile all the medical data from the pregnancy and birth. She worked with the Velkari physicians to write a comprehensive report that would be released, alongside Thyramul's announcement. The scientific evidence was clear. Human genetics were not inferior to Velkari genetics, just different. The adaptability and resilience of human DNA was actually a significant strength. The day of the announcement arrived. The 3 humans were given places of honor in the observation gallery of the throne chamber. The room was filled with Velkari nobles, scientists, politicians, and military leaders. Millions more watched through broadcast feeds. Theramel entered the chamber carrying Hannah in her arms. She wore simple robes, not the elaborate formal dress expected for such an occasion. She wanted people to see her as a mother, not just as queen consort. She walked to the center of the chamber where a floating platform waited. She began speaking, her voice steady and clear. She told her people the full story of what had happened. The resonance ceremony, the unexpected integration of human DNA, the pregnancy, the birth. She did not hide any details or try to make it sound more controlled than it was. Then she held up Hannah for everyone to see. The tiny human child looked around at the vast chamber full of strange beings with her curious brown eyes. She did not cry or seem afraid. She simply existed, small and perfect and real. Theramel spoke about what she had learned. She talked about how the Velkari had spent thousands of years perfecting their genetics, and how they had achieved remarkable things. But in their pursuit of perfection, they had lost something vital. They had lost diversity. They had lost unpredictability. They had lost the ability to be surprised by life. She explained that humans reproduced in what seemed like a primitive way, leaving things to chance, accepting imperfection. But that chaos was actually a strength. Every human child was unique, carrying combinations of genes that had never existed before. That diversity made humanity resilient and adaptable in ways the Velkari no longer were. She said that she had mocked human fertility, had called it a cosmic joke. But she was wrong. The joke was on the Velkari. They had optimized themselves to the point where they could no longer evolve naturally. They had become stagnant, perfect, but unchanging. Hana represented something new. Not human, not Velkari, but both. A combination that should have been impossible, but existed because life always found a way. She was proof that there was strength in diversity, in chaos, in accepting the unpredictable. Theramel looked directly into the broadcast cameras and spoke to her entire civilization. She said that the Velkari needed to learn from humanity, not to abandon their genetic knowledge, but to remember that perfection was not the only goal. That variation and adaptability were valuable. That sometimes the best designs were the ones that emerged naturally, rather than being imposed from above. She proposed a new alliance with humanity, not as superior species teaching inferior ones, but as equals learning from each other. The Velkari could teach humans about genetic medicine and longevity. Humans could teach the Velkari about diversity and resilience. Together, both species could become stronger. The chamber was silent when she finished speaking. Theramel stood on her platform, holding her daughter, waiting to see how her people would respond. Then one of the Velkari scientists in the audience began a slow, rhythmic sound, a gesture of approval in their culture. Another joined, then another. Soon the entire chamber was filled with the sound of approval, support, acceptance. Not everyone agreed. There were still protests outside the chamber, still angry voices calling for punishment. But something had shifted in Velkari society. Their queen consort had shown them something they had forgotten. That life was not about control and perfection. It was about growth and change, and accepting the unexpected. In the weeks that followed, the relationship between the Velkari Empire and humanity began to transform. Scientists from both species started collaborative projects. Diplomats negotiated treaties based on mutual respect. Trade routes opened up, carrying not just goods, but ideas and culture. Theramel stepped back from some of her official duties to focus on raising Hana. She learned to change diapers, a task that baffled and disgusted her consort mates. She learned about baby schedules and sleep training and the thousand small tasks that came with caring for a naturally born child. She was exhausted and frustrated and happier than she had ever been. The three humans eventually returned to Earth as heroes. They had not just established first contact with a major alien empire. They had changed how that empire saw itself and humanity. Dr. Yuna was offered positions at a dozen universities to study interspecies biology. Captain Day 1 wrote a book about his experiences that became required reading at every diplomatic academy. Ambassador Hyan Wu was promoted to lead all human Velkari relations, but they all stayed in contact with Thyramul. They received regular updates about Hana, watching her grow through video messages. The little girl was thriving, developing faster than human children, but slower than Velkari young. She showed traits from both species: the fierce intelligence of the Velkari, the emotional depth of humans. When Hana was 2 years old, Thyramul brought her to Earth for a visit. It was the first time a Velkari queen consort had visited the human homeworld. The trip was full of diplomatic significance, but what Thyramul cared about most was showing her daughter where half of her heritage came from. They visited the ocean, and Hana laughed at the waves. They walked through forests, and she touched flowers and leaves with wonder. They met human children, and she played with them without caring that they looked different from her mother's people. On the last day of the visit, Thyramul stood with the 3 humans who had been part of her journey. Hana sat on the grass nearby, examining a butterfly that had landed on her hand. Thyramul thanked them for their patience, their kindness, their willingness to help even when she had insulted them. She said that meeting them had changed her life and the future of her entire civilization. Hyan Wu smiled and said that sometimes the universe had a sense of humor, that the best outcomes came from the most unexpected places, that what seemed like a disaster could become a blessing if you were brave enough to accept it. Yuna added that life always found a way, that chaos and order were both necessary, that the future belonged to those who could embrace both. Day 1 simply nodded at Hana and said that she was the proof that different species could find common ground, the proof that humanity's messy, chaotic, inefficient approach to life had value, the proof that strength came in many forms. Thyramul picked up her daughter and held her close. Hana giggled and wrapped her small arms around her mother's neck. 2 eyes met 4 eyes with perfect trust and love. The galaxy had learned something important. Humanity might not have the most advanced technology, or the most optimized genetics, or the most powerful military, but humans had something that could change civilizations: the ability to adapt, to survive, to thrive in chaos. The stubborn insistence on creating life against all odds. The Velkari had laughed at human fertility, but the alien queen had borne a human child, and in doing so, she had discovered what her perfect species had lost: the messy, beautiful, chaotic wonder of natural life. And the galaxy would never underestimate humanity again.